Sometimes one feels helpless. There is only one thing you can do at this stage. We all experience such moments in life, but in war, these moments are much more difficult. The decision a soldier makes in a war zone is very important. This decision can sometimes change the fate of the war. The operation launched by one soldier can affect the safety of millions of people. The history of war is full of extraordinary operations. But a soldier thinks of himself first and foremost. According to psychologists, the most important priority for a human being is to ensure his or her own safety. This is the most natural human desire. This is why many soldiers are afraid to take risks in a war zone. When the soldiers realize that they are going to die in this war, there is only one thing they can do: surrender. This is what Russian soldiers are doing. Thousands of Russian soldiers continue to surrender to the Ukrainian army every day. According to reports from the war zone, the number of Russian soldiers surrendering is increasing rapidly. We contacted our sources in the war zone to get information on this issue and found extraordinary information. Independent journalism is very important for this kind of news to continue. Don't forget to support our team to keep independent reporting going. You can use the Super Thanks button below the video. Now let's get to that information. As you know, something extraordinary is happening in the fighting in Bakhmut. The Russian army is doing everything in its power to capture this town, but it is not succeeding. The Ukrainian army is showing a historic success in the defense of the city, and Western countries are constantly sending support to the Ukrainian army to prevent the city from falling into the hands of Russia. Many European media outlets emphasize that the conflict in Bakhmut is very important for Europe. This is also emphasized in intelligence reports published by European countries. European analysts say, protect Bakhmut for the security of Europe. The Kremlin's main goal in this war was to capture Kiev. This was to establish a new government in Ukraine. The Kremlin was going to assign many Russian officers to this government, but this carries a big risk for Europe. Ukraine has long borders with many European states. Everyone was talking about the possibility of Russia attacking Europe through Ukraine. That's why European states believe that the Ukrainian army must win this war. If Russia succeeds in capturing Ukraine, it can continue to attack the West. The Russian army must capture Bakhmut in order to advance on Kiev. The road network in Bakhmut extends to many European countries. The Russian army wants to use this road to transport its troops. That's why European countries are supporting the Ukrainian army's struggle in Bakhmut. The Ukrainian army had a big advantage over the Russian troops in Bakhmut, especially the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group, Russia's mercenary company, suffered heavy losses in backwards Prigozhin. The company's director blamed the Russian commanders for these losses. He said that the Russian commanders' war strategy was completely wrong. He also said that the needs of the soldiers were not met. After these statements, the Wagner Group decided to withdraw from Bakhmut. Wagner's move led to more problems for Russian troops in this region. The Ukrainian army managed to establish a great superiority over the Russian army. It was widely recognized that the Russian troops could no longer succeed in Bakhmut. In this situation, the Russian troops also wanted to withdraw. However, the Kremlin did not allow the Russian army to withdraw from this region. Hundreds of Russian soldiers die in this region every day. The Russian soldiers have realized that if they keep fighting, they will be killed in this area. That's why they wanted to surrender. It is known that hundreds of Russian soldiers have surrendered, especially in the last week. Russian soldiers use interesting methods to surrender. The most common of these methods is trench watch. Russian soldiers are assigned to stand guard in the trenches at midnight. The soldiers on guard duty sneak out of these trenches and crawl towards the Ukrainian army. The trenches of the Ukrainian army and the Russian army are very close on many fronts. Ukrainian soldiers do not open fire at the soldiers coming towards them. Russian soldiers, on the other hand, say the following phrase when they approach Ukrainian trenches: "I want to live." They Want to Live project as one of the most important projects of the Ukrainian government. This project is designed to help Russian soldiers who want to surrender to do so. Russian soldiers can surrender safely by using the I Want to Live project. Also, the Ukrainian army says that no Russian soldier who says I want to live will be killed. That's why Russian soldiers say I want to live when they surrender after laying down their weapons. Russian soldiers are taken inside the trenches of the Ukrainian army. These soldiers are immediately taken to a secret location. The image of one of the surrendered Russian soldiers touched millions. A Russian soldier who was given soup and tea started to cry. The Russian soldier said he had not had soup for a long time. The Russian army cannot feed its soldiers on many fronts. Russian soldiers are forced to eat only canned food. This situation also leads to a decrease in the immunity of the Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers get sick frequently. Many soldiers had to leave the army due to epidemics in the Russian army. The surrendered Russian soldiers are treated very well by the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army prepares clean clothes and a comfortable bed for the surrendered Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers are given time to rest. Doctors also take care of them. Many medicines are also provided for the soldiers. Many requests of Russian soldiers are met. Soldiers are allowed to talk to their families on the phone in this way. The soldiers are psychologically relieved. Then the Russian soldiers are interrogated by Ukrainian experts. During this interrogation, a lot of information is obtained from the Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army uses the information received during these interrogations for operations. The surrendered Russian soldiers provide a lot of information about the capacity of the army, the number of ammunition in the Russian army, the location of commanders, and battle plans. All the plans of the Russian army are exposed. The surrender of Russian soldiers reveals the Russian army's offensive plans. This makes the Russian army desperate. But the Russian commanders can do nothing to prevent the soldiers from surrendering. The surrender of Russian soldiers is the talk of many countries. This is also damaging Russia's reputation. The Kremlin is trying to prevent any news about the surrender of Russian soldiers. However, the Ukrainian government frequently shares developments on this issue. The Ukrainian government does not share the number of Russian soldiers who have surrendered or their personal details with anyone. Secrecy is important to ensure that these soldiers return home safely when the war is over. Therefore, it is not known exactly how many Russian soldiers have surrendered. However, our sources in the Ukrainian army emphasize that the number of surrendered Russian soldiers is increasing every day. Russia's invasion of Ukraine succeeded in gathering the countries of the world under a common goal. Poland, one of the countries most opposed to this invasion, showed serious reactions to Russia's Belarusian-backed invasion moves. The strategic location of Poland, which was also supported by the USA, was perfect to support Kiev. Already, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has pushed Poland to the forefront of the Second Cold War. This country sided with Ukraine against Russia as a key cog in the NATO alliance, a major contributor to the common defense and a key ally of the United States. Early in the war, Poland served as a temporary headquarters to coordinate the flow of military aid to Ukraine. This operation was shifted to Germany, but Poland remains the key point for the transport of military equipment to Ukraine. While Poland is training at full speed to increase its army to 300,000, it also buys over 1,500 of the most powerful tanks. While HIMARS Patriot and M1 Abrams are deployed to Poland's Russian and Belarusian borders. Poland stores nearly 3,000 NATO military vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, technical security vehicles, and self-propelled bridges will be stored in the center's warehouses. In addition, Poland is taking serious measures and closing its borders on Russia's Kaliningrad border and Belarusian border. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kaminski announced that Poland has begun to build a state-of-the-art electronic barrier to monitor and counter any illegal activity on Russia's land border with Kaliningrad territory. It will run 210 kilometers with its clock tracking cameras and motion detectors in these areas and is scheduled to be completed in the fall. Poland has decided to close the border for Russian and Belarusian trucks from June 1st. This decision shocked Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. Polish Minister of Internal Affairs and Administration Mariusz Kaminski recently signed a decree suspending the freight traffic of Russian and Belarusian vehicles across the Belarusian border from June 1st. The resolution stipulated that until a special order, Poland would not allow trucks, semi-trailers, trailers, or semi-trailers registered on the territory of Belarus and Russia to pass through Belarus. This step was prepared by the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs in response to the arrest of Andrzej Poczobut, an activist of the Polish minority in Belarus and co-chairman of the Union of Poles in Belarus, along with sanctions against 365 Belarusian officials. The head of the ministry, Kaminsky, ordered the drafting of sanctions in February, the day after Połubek was convicted by the first instance court. 2 days after this decision, Poland suspended traffic at the Polish-Belarusian highway border crossing in Bobroniki until further notice. Russian and Belarusian vehicles were passing customs control only at a terminal in Koroszyna, the only open crossing of the Polish-Belarusian highway, and at the Kukaraka-Kislovice checkpoint. Warsaw not only closed the border gate, but also took critical steps for its security. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced that Poland has received MQ-9 Reaper military drones from the USA to monitor the situation on the border with Belarus. The head of the department noted that the MQ-9 unmanned aerial vehicle was delivered to Poland from the USA due to urgent operational need. Now the Polish Air Force will use drones for reconnaissance on the eastern border, especially from Belarus and Ukraine. Poland plans to use leased drones until it buys its own drone. On the other hand, after the closure of Bobrovka checkpoint, the Belarusian regime imposed restrictions as Polish carriers could not use the border crossings on the part of the Belarusian border with Lithuania and Latvia. But Lithuania also closed the Stasilas Bakhmut railway crossing on the border with Belarus as a retaliatory move. Another critical move to the pro-Moscow Minsk came from Lithuania. Moscow was also indirectly affected by this. Warsaw, understandably, devotes much of its energies to preventing and, if necessary, resisting another Russian attack on the free world. To this end, Poland has increased its defense budget to 4% of GDP this year. That was twice the value of what NATO asked its members to invest in defense. In addition, the minister of the Polish cabinet, Lukasz Schreiber, stated that the frozen assets of the Russian oligarchs exceeded €1 billion and urged the parliamentary opposition to support the proposed bill. The bill was presented to a special commission of the Polish parliament, which considered proposals to amend the country's constitution. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kamiński reported that Poland will impose sanctions on several hundred Belarusian officials in connection with the sentence of Andrzej Poczobut, one of the leaders of the Union of Poles in Belarus, in connection with the maintenance of the severe sentence imposed on Andrzej Poczobut. It was decided to include in the list of sanctions several hundred representatives of the Lukashenko regime responsible for political repression, especially against Poles living in Belarus, Kamiński said. The Supreme Court of Belarus rejected Andrzej Połubek's appeal and upheld the 8-year sentence of the first instance court in the strict regime colony. Warsaw was moved by the Belarusian Supreme Court's decision in February to uphold the conviction of Andrzej Poczobut, a Polish-Belarusian activist who was sentenced to 8 years in prison for inciting hatred. The tit-for-tat moves between Warsaw and Minsk, Moscow were once again critical at the center of events. In addition, the Polish Ministry of Defense has launched a free program called Train with the Army, which offers private military training with members of the military to people aged 15 to 65. The Train with the Army aims to provide citizens with basic military skills and encourage additional volunteers to join the nation's armed forces. The first edition of this program took place in the fall. At the time, demand significantly exceeded the number of spots available at 4,000. But in the latest training, the number of places available has doubled to 8,000. Also, the Polish government has launched a 16-day basic military training course for anyone interested. The head of the Ministry of Defense emphasized that the organization of such training is important to increase the reserve troop reserves of the Polish army. Poland also recently ordered over $10 billion in weapons from South Korea. The deals include 200 K9 Thunder howitzers, 48 Fa-50 light attack aircraft, 180 K2 Black Panther tanks, and 2 18 K2 39 Shmu rocket launchers. Considering all these, it's very important that Poland is an ally of Kiev against the Russian occupation, against both the Minsk and Moscow governments, because Poland boasts that its army may soon be 3 times larger than the United Kingdom. The Polish government states that within 2 years the country's armed forces will double, making it one of the most powerful military groups in Europe. Russia's invasion of Ukraine spurred the Polish government, which ordered billions of pounds for around 1,500 tanks. Most of them will come from South Korea, with 1,000 K2s purchased. 250 brand new M1A2 Abrams will come from America, along with 116 old M1A1 Abrams. These will be used to temporarily replace tanks sent to aid Ukraine. Alongside these military moves, Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced plans to double the country's army from 150,000 to 300,000. In summary, if Russia and Belarus continued to take joint steps for the invasion of Ukraine, they will face Poland, which is supported by a military strong country like the USA. So Ukraine is not alone on two different fronts. Violent clashes continue at full speed in the trenches of Ukraine, even for each square meter of area. Both sides of the war are in an incredible trench warfare, especially in and near the city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. In recent days, the Ukrainian armed forces have turned their offensive axis 125 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut. In this region, Marinka, one of the most important centers of the eastern Ukraine front line, is located. Nowadays, Ukrainian forces have started to create a ground attack corridor in an area of 125 kilometers located between Bakhmut and Marinka. Since the last few weeks, the Ukrainian army has started to build up a military buildup in the Marinka region, even from the direction of Kolomyia and Horlivka. These two cities are located in the northeast of Marinka. But there is another critical front line from Marinka to Kirillovka and Horlivka. This is where Avdiivka is located. The distance between Marinka and Avdiivka is approximately 43 kilometers. In other words, the Ukrainian armed forces was able to get military support more comfortably from Avdiivka due to its much shorter distance than Kolomyia and Horlivka. All these military preparations indicated that after Bakhmut, the base of attack of the Ukrainian forces was Marinka. The sighting of the 108th Separate Mountain Assault Battalion in the Ukrainian army near this city was one of the most concrete examples of Kiev's attack plans in and around Marinka. In addition to sending the military resources of the Ukrainian army to Marinka, we will have to mention that there is a civilian Ukrainian force of about 5,000 people in this city. In other words, the Ukrainians were ready to start the freedom struggle in Marinka by backing both their military power and the people's resistance presence. The Ukrainians who were ready for an all-out offensive operation finally started their offensive operations in Marinka recently. A total of 39 clashes took place in this city in just 24 hours. As a result of these incredible clashes, the 108th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, together with local people, managed to break through the 3-kilometer Russian defense line in Marinka. The Russian forces in this region had to withdraw their defense shields at the same rate in order not to increase the military losses. After the heavy defeat of Russian President Vladimir Putin in Bakhmut in the last few days, this fiasco in Marinka also seriously demoralized Russia. Ukrainian Armed Forces Land Forces Commander Oleksandr Kursky made critical statements on this issue. Commander Kursky stated that the struggle will continue both in Bakhmut and in Marinka around this city, while the local people and the special forces of the Ukrainian army, who were the architects of the Ukrainian victory in Marinka, continued their attacks. It is known that the city was badly damaged due to clashes. Marinka Township, located just a few kilometers west of Donetsk City, was reportedly completely destroyed, and local authorities and law enforcement forces were reportedly forced to evacuate all remaining civilians from a population of 9,000 before February 2022 inches November 2022. The humanitarian workers who made up Martinska Romada estimate that out of a pre-war population of 40,000, only 65,000 civilians remained. The situation around Marinka is also very critical. Villages in Krasnohorivka, located on the northern line of the city, are subject to frequent shelling and access to electricity. Gas or piped water is limited. Despite service providers' efforts to repair the damage caused by repeated attacks in Krasnohorivka, for example, at the end of April, there was no electricity, water or gas. According to local authorities, in addition to the massive destruction of homes and other vital civilian infrastructure, including schools, the war has disrupted markets and other essential services. According to a rapid assessment by the INGO Reach and information provided by Ukrainian authorities. In addition, this situation forced people to a great extent. Humanitarian aid and the support of volunteer groups are more needed for survival. This is why Ukrainian forces are trying to at least clear Russian troops both on the Bakhmut front line and in the trenches in and around Marinka. After these operations, the reconstruction of these cities is planned with the help of the West and the USA. So what is the latest situation on the front lines in and around Bakhmut? Marinka. After these striking offensive operations by the Ukrainian army, Former Russian commander Igor Girkin recently upended the strategic senselessness of Russia's claimed victory in Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin, commander and founder of the Wagner Group, a paramilitary unit, claimed that his troops had taken full control of Bakhmut on Saturday after months of fighting for that city. Commander Prigozhin's allegations, which could not be independently verified, were denied by Ukraine because Colonel Sergei Chitravati also announced that Commander Prigozhin's statement was not correct and that the Ukrainian forces' struggle in Bakhmut continued while Commander Prigozhin celebrated the alleged victory. Girkin drew all the attention with his statements that the opposite was the case. Commander Girkin, who came to the fore during Russia's annexation of Crimea and was convicted of participating in the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 last year, has become a leading voice among Russian nationalists supporting the Ukraine war. But the former Russian commander began to be more and more critical of the Battle of Moscow, and Girkin, with his unbelievably accurate predictions, clarified unknown issues in the war between Ukraine and Russia. That's why Igor Girkin's statements about the latest situation on the front lines in and near Bakhmut are very important. The former Russian commander stated that the losses suffered by the Russian army in the eastern Ukraine front lines such as Bakhmut and Marinka were meaningless. According to Girkin, Russia was making a strategic mistake and continued its offensive operations despite record losses. While the exact extent of these losses is unclear, the White House estimated in early May that at least 30,000 Russian soldiers were killed in the Bakhmut area over a 5-month period. In addition to the alleged losses of the Russian army, Igor Girkin points out that Wagner forces also suffered serious losses in these frontline ones. Military analysts, meanwhile, are bipolar about whether or not Bakhmut can truly deliver a strategic victory to Russia. While some analysts argue that Russia wasted time on Bakhmut and other eastern Ukraine front lines, another group of analysts argues that Bakhmut is important to the Russians. A Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin stated that a Russian victory in this city would be more of a symbolic value than actually changing the course of the war. So Lloyd Austin thought about Bakhmut just like Igor Girkin. In fact, when we consider this issue from a very broad perspective, we can clearly understand that both officials are right. Because despite all the efforts of the Russian army, the fact that neither Bakhmut nor the eastern front lines such as Marinka have been able to completely capture, and even the Ukrainian forces have gained a more advantageous position in these regions, confirm this thesis. In addition, Girkin detailed his criticisms of Russia's military leadership. According to Igor Girkin, the armed forces of the Russian Federation took nothing but suffered profuse losses over Avdiivka and Marinka and Volodar. Girkin thinks that among these losses were Russian soldiers and officers at the front mobilized and volunteers, not those who planned and managed from the big Russian headquarters. In other words, according to the former Russian commander, thousands of Russian officers and soldiers on the front line who gave only directives during the clashes on the front lines such as Bakhmut and Marinka paid for these wrong decisions with their lives. It is expected that this situation will continue in the same way in the future. Because while President Putin is at the top of the administration and waiting for victory, the Ukrainians are striving with all their might to save their country and regain its freedom. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers lose their lives on the battlefield in Ukraine. During this process, Russia, on the other hand, still wants to continue the occupation by hiding its losses. But there is something very important to remember. No country's military resources are unlimited. In other words, sooner or later, Russia will also experience a loss of soldiers that it can no longer hide. When that moment comes, it is a matter of curiosity. What will President Putin do, and how this war will end?